Well, what an absolutely crazy, interesting, and significant Monza qualifying session that we've just seen. Lando Norris taking a well-deserved pole position. I've got some notes written down on my phone here that I'd like to run you through. So if you're interested in what my thoughts are, then definitely keep watching. For those of you new to my channel, my name is Martin and I started racing when I was 12. In the sim world, I've raced and beaten some of the best drivers in Australia. I worked as a driver and performance engineer in Formula 3 and I developed my own race strategy simulation software for Formula 1. I raced in KZ2 at the highest level and got pole position in my first ever race. I specialize in the open formula category and now have my own course and website where I can share my 20 plus years of driving experience with you, which I'll put a link to in the description below. Absolutely fascinating qualifying session that we've seen. Monza is a really unique challenge for the drivers because the corners are very short. And so when you pick your turn-in point into a lot of the corners, you're kind of stuck with it and you have to live with it. So it can be a case of either you fluke it and get it right, or you mess it up and you just have to live with that. So it was really interesting to see the drivers, how they turned into the corner, at which point they turned in, and how you judge that. Obviously, you've got the braking references and you've got your downshift switch. You can click 1, 2, 3, and then, pick a point at which to turn in. But to give you an example, Lando totally messed up turn 2 in the first chicane when he was starting his pole position lap. And he turned in a little bit early into turn 2, got onto that curb, bumpy on that curb. The cars are very stiff and big and heavy and not compliant. And he got a really poor run out of turn 2 all the way down to the second chicane. So that's an example of the timing of the turn in and how that can go wrong. So that's significant because Lando had a lot more pace in hand. You could imagine if he had have hooked that up well, it would have been worth around 1 to 2 tenths, and Lando could have really, really destroyed Oscar and the rest of the field as well. So the championship significance of this, given that it's a McLaren 1-2 on a completely different track, is massive. I'm officially declaring this championship on. Now, not only did Lando and Oscar dominate in Hungary, which has a lot of long corners of constant radius, in the heat as well, now they're dominating on a totally different track, which is low downforce spec, also in the heat once again. So to see the McLaren strengths in high downforce, long corners, and now in low downforce chicanes, like the McLaren is now like an exceptional race car. So the championship significance of the McLaren being a great car, together with the Red Bull, falling behind as well, like championship on. So it'll be interesting to see what McLaren do with Oscar and Lando moving forward. Now, Lando's had a lot of poor starts recently. I called out in my Netherlands analysis that Lando really needs to angle his car across to the inside and get to the inside as quickly as possible to avoid Oscar getting up the inside. So let's assume that Lando gets a bad start and Oscar gets a good start. Well, Lando can still defend that if he chops across Oscar's line, gets into the inside. What you want to do as the pole sitter is trade your pole position for the inside, because the inside is more valuable. There's no point just driving straight and then watching the P2 come alongside you. You've kind of wasted your advantage. So I'll be looking out for that at the start. If Lando does indeed get a bad start, how eager is he to defend that lead? I think the lead is going to be super important, because it always is in Monza, because the slipstream is not worth that much. The DRS is not worth that much. All of the cars are very slippery as it is. So it's tricky to get an overtake. The overtaking delta, therefore, is quite high. So a couple of driving points to note. There's a few interesting lines that you could see the drivers taking out of the exit of Les Meus 2 on the run down to Ascari, and out of Ascari as well. You saw drivers like Carlos Sainz exit Ascari and immediately come across to take the racing line into the Parabolica. And then you saw drivers like George run the car like straight for a little bit and come across later. So that really depends on what the drivers are trying to achieve. I'm not sure if Carlos wanted to dodge a few bumps down that back straight on the way to the Parabolica, and therefore switching across the racing line early. Maybe that suited him better. And what George wanted to do was exit the Ascari with the steering wheel as you see it and get that steering wheel straight and run the car all the way along the white line for maximum acceleration. And then when you reach peak velocity, terminal velocity, then bring the car across to the left and take the parabolica. I must say that George, when he was bringing the car across to the left, he wasn't doing it in a very subtle way at all. He was like really like putting in a good armful of steering to get it across to the left and then take the parabolica. But he was gaining out of Ascari with the acceleration, having the steering wheel straight. As for Carlos Sainz and the drivers that were bringing the car across to the left very early, like I say, I'm not sure if they were dodging bumps or not, but it seemed to be working very well for George, and a great qualifying for George Russell there. Now I might just draw for you on the whiteboard just a couple of those different lines that we could see out of the Ascari chicane heading into the parabolica. So you're heading into Ascari, it's the left, the long right, and then the left. And then this is the key part here where I'm drawing on the top left of your screen. Or let me just finish the track. Now Carlos, we'll draw him in red, was obviously going through the Ascari chicane as per usual, all good. And he was coming across like straight away. And the problem is that George obviously would agree with is when you put in this additional steering lock into the car, you pay for that penalty the whole way down the straight. Obviously, you can imagine if you're going down the straight, turning the wheel like a lot, it costs you straight line speed. And to that end, it's the same sort of thing, just at smaller scale. You know, that little left-hand input into the car at the start of this straight is costing slightly some acceleration. But if it's avoiding bumps, then that's a totally different story. Now, what George was doing, which I'm going to try to draw in purple, for example, was exiting the same position, but going totally straight here and getting all of that good acceleration down this straight. When George chooses to put that input in, it's much later and all of the acceleration work has already been done. So interesting to see the two different styles there. A similar thing was happening out of Lesmos 2 as well. Now in Piastri's first run, he put a wheel on the grass on the entry to Ascari. I think that kind of ruined his run and a little bit of his momentum as well. Again, the drivers are trying to just thread the needle through. And like I said before in the intro, it's just so hard to time your turn in. And when you do turn in, you are stuck with whatever you have. Now, Max Verstappen had a big slide into the parabolica on his first run, and a similar loss of rear grip to what we saw with Kimi Antonelli right at the peak load in the middle of that corner with the downshifts and the engine braking working maximum. The rear tires just let go and Max had to correct and slide into that. It's interesting to see that the Red Bull just doesn't have the overall grip, and when you look at Max's driving, he's actually chasing for lap time. He's in a way overdriving a little bit as well, just trying to extract as much as possible. So Max knows that this is championship on as well. This is quite alarming for Max. And I'm sure that we're going to hear in the interviews after that Max is going to be like, this is situation critical right now, because the McLaren is a strong car in all the conditions and is looking like I have to be honest, it's looking like Lando is now the favorite for the championship, because the Mercedes is strong, the Ferrari is strong, the McLaren is extra strong, and the Red Bull is nowhere. So it is very much situation critical. Now that's all I had on my notes, guys. And just to conclude, one of the things I'm really looking for is, does Lando cut across Oscar and trade pole position for the inside into turn one and keep the inside? So it's going to be that, in addition to the start quality that he actually gets, which involves the throttle, the revs, the tire temperatures, the reactions, the gear, and so on. So that's all for this video, guys. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Cheers.